Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava Batra, page 57a, top of the page. Daf Nun Zayin, Amud Aleph, top of the page, with the words Hahu Shtara Dehava. Hahu Shtara Dehava Chasimi Ale Batre, Shechib Chad Minayhu. The Gemara relates there was a certain document that had the signatures of two individuals on it. One of the signatory witnesses died, and when the court sought to ratify the document, which requires either that the witnesses personally attest to the validity of their signatures, or that two other witnesses attest to the validity of the signatures, the brother, asa achu dekai, echad achrinilis hode ach simas yadei idach. The brother of the witness who remained alive and one other individual came to testify with regard to the signature of the other deceased witness, while the living witness attested to his own signature. Sofer Ravina Lememar. Ravina thought to say like this, that this case is the same as the halacha in the Mishnah. It's like the Mishnah, which states that a testimony was given by three brothers, each of whom testify about 1 year, and another unrelated individual joined with each of the brothers as the second witness. These are considered to be three distinct testimonies. Similarly, in this case, one brother attests to his own signature, while the other brother attests to the signature of the deceased witness. Amar le Ravashi said to him, Mi dami? Am I a dummy? No, I'm just kidding. Mi dami? Are these cases comparable? Hasam lo nafik neche riva dimamayna apuma diachi. Hachanafik nache riva dimamona apuma diachi. Are these cases comparable? They're the property less 1/4. In other words, 3/4 of the property in question is not removed from the possession of the prior owner based upon the mouth. In other words, a testimony of brothers. Each brother provides only half the testimony for each year about which he testifies. Here, the property less 1/4 is removed from the possession of the debtor, detailed in the document based upon the mouth of brothers. One brother attests to his own signature, which constitutes half of the testimony, while the other signature is authenticated by the testimony of the other brother and another individual. It follows that 3/4 of the testimony is given by brothers, and it is therefore invalid. And that is the end of that new Mishnah. The Mishnah states, Elu devarim sheyesh lahen chazaka. These are the uses of property that have means to establish the presumption of ownership. Ve'elu devarim she'ein lahem chazaka. And these are the uses of property that do not have the means to establish the presumption of ownership. Hayamamed behem bechaser ta'anur reichaim v'chirayim. If one would place an oven, a millstone, or a stove there, umegadel tarnagol, or if one raises chickens, v'nosen zivlo b'chatzer, or if he places fertilizer in a courtyard, einu chazaka. These actions are not sufficient to establish presumption of ownership. Aval also machitz lev hemto gavo esut fachim V'chein l'tana v'chein l'krayim v'chein l'chayim hich netzar garland chabayis v'yas m'cham l'zivloi amak shloisha oy gavoy shloisha reizu chazoki. But if one constructed a partition 10 handbreadths high to contain his animal, and similarly if he constructs a partition for his oven, and similarly if he constructs a partition for his stove, and similarly if he constructs a partition for his millstone, or if he brought chickens into the house, or if he fashioned a place in the ground for his fertilizer, that is 3 handbreadths deep or 3 handbreadths high, these actions are sufficient to establish the presumption of ownership. That's the Mishnah. Okay. Gemara, the Talmud says, Maishna Reisha Umaishna Seifa. The Gemara asks, what is different in the first clause, while where having an animal stand in a courtyard is insufficient to establish the presumption of ownership, and what is different in the latter clause, where constructing a partition is sufficient to establish the presumption of ownership? Amr Ula. Ula says, Kol she'ilu b'nechse hager kana. B'nechse chavero kana. Kol she'ilu b'nechse hager lo kana. B'nechse chavero lo kana. Ula says, with regards to any act which, if one were to perform it on an ownerless property, such as the property of a convert who dies without heirs, he would acquire that property. The same act is sufficient for him to acquire the property of another if he performed it over the course of 3 years, provided it is accompanied by the claim that the property had been purchased. Conversely, any act that, if one were to perform it on the property of a convert who died without heirs, he would not acquire that property. The same act is sufficient for him to acquire the property of another. Taking possession of ownerless property requires an act to be done with regard to the property itself, such as constructing a partition, but merely having an animal stand there is not sufficient. Therefore, it does not establish the presumption of ownership. Maskefler of Sheshes objects to this by asking, Uklalahu. And is this an established principle? But there is plowing, which V'harei near Ninichse Hagir Kana, Ninichse Chabero Lo Kana, Rechias Peros, Ninichse Chabero Kana, Ninichse Hagir Lo Kana. Sheshes wants to say that this is an established principle. He wants to say that it is an established. He's asking on the fact if performing an act on the property, I believe, is that an established principle. But if there is plowing, I think that's what he's asking. But if there is plowing, which if performed on the property of the convert who died without heirs, one acquires it, but if performed on the property of another, one does not acquire it. And additionally, there is consumption of produce for the duration of 3 years, which, if performed on the property of another, and one acquires by establishing the presumption of ownership, but if not performed on the property of a convert, but if performed on the property of a convert who died without heirs, one does not acquire it. These cases contradict Ula's claim that the modes of acquisition are analogous. Rav Nachman said that Rabba Bar Avu, that says Barchana, force of habit, it's Rabba Bar Avu. Rather, Rav Nachman said that Rabba Bar Avu said, Elam Rav Nachman on Rabba Bar Avu, and that's 57a.